We're doing something different today. We're coming to you from Zoom, and we're going to do a video podcast. This technically then doesn't even qualify as a podcast. Mr. D here. I got Mr. Crispin with me today. I got Mr. Ritz, and I got Mr. Hennard, who, he's still a member of the department. He kind of is.
Of course.
We were talking about the gold rush and the 49ers, so we had to bring him in. So we got some questions from students, and Katie Dobry came up with the majority of these. So thank you, Katie. I said I'd give somebody a shout out if they did. The first question we're going to start out with has to do with the gold rush. She asked about the 1849 gold rush, and Mr. Hennard's a 49ers fan. So I thought, who better to talk about this than Mr. Hennard? So Mr. Hennard, take it away. Tell us about the gold rush.
Well, I appreciate that, and thanks, Katie, for the great question. Yes, obviously, as a huge San Francisco 49ers fan, it hit home with me. So I decided to rock my San Francisco 49ers garb today, also for our virtual Spirit Week. So I just wanted to start off basically with the discovery of gold in California. According to history.com, January 28th, 1848, James Wilson Marshall, who was actually from New Jersey, and happened to be in California helping to set up a sawmill for John Sutter. He's doing this right around Coloma, California, which is a little bit north of Sacramento. Fun fact, the Air Force Base that I was stationed at, Beale Air Force Base, is about 30 minutes from the original location.
I was going to say that's a double good thing, because you spent time there that you got this question. So
yeah, I've been all through like the country, kind of where it started. There was actually, if I'm not mistaken, there was talk when I was on the base. I don't know, I never went there, but that there was actually an old abandoned mine from the time on the base territory.
Did you ever go look for it?
There's actually a whole bunch of mines that are abandoned in and around California. They have to kind of put up signs and make ordinances and stuff to keep people away, because the mines still have gold in them.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not huge amounts, but it's still,
Right.
still enough to draw people in. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, it was kind of, always like among the airmen talk. Beale Air Force Base is interesting. It's very large in mass, but it's very small in population. So there's a lot of just really open area. And so in security forces, part of our job is patrolling the base and stuff like that. And people would talk about, on perimeter patrols, trying to find some of these places or whatever. But I just thought that was a cool, fun fact to add, that, that location, Northern California, really central Northern California, is a pretty wide open country. It's not the big cities and stuff that everybody kind of thinks of when they think of California. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where all of this started. So John Sutter, the man who had asked for the mill to be built, they were trying to build a sawmill, and it was on, he was the founder of Nueva, and I'm going to probably butcher this, but I think it's Helvetia, which is New Switzerland. The colony would ultimately become Sacramento. So right there in Northern California. And essentially what happens is James Wilson Marshall comes across some gold flakes, and he comes back and begins reporting out that he's found gold in California. The interesting fact about that is, I guess what would it be, 4 days later, on February 2nd, 1848, the United States signs the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right? Officially taking control of California from the Mexicans after the Mexican-American War. And at that time, when the territory is admitted, California has roughly a population that's made up of about 6,500 Spanish-Mexican settlers, about 700 foreigners, they qualify it as, most of which are Americans, right, from the colonies, America at the time after that. Yeah. And then about 150,000 Native Americans. They also said that that's about half the population of natives that lived there upon original arrival of the Spanish, right, for colonization. And, fast forward to the end of this, why it's so significant, roughly, let's see, by the end of by 1860, the population of California is 380,000,
Yeah.
right? And that's not, almost over doubling, right, the population that existed there before. So that's kind of what makes this significant. Also, the fact that California is going to get admitted as a state by, where do I have it?
1850.
1850, yeah, by the end of 1850. There it is. Yep.
That's
so
fast.
by 1850,
That's fast.
right? Yeah, I mean, you're talking 2 years. And we know, according to the Northwest Ordinance, right, that the only thing that the Articles of Confederation ever got right, if you follow Mr. Crispin, you know that, right? That in order to apply for statehood, you need to have a population of 60,000, and that normally took some time to accomplish. Yeah. You're talking about a state that gets admitted through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo as a territory in February of 1848, and by 1850 already has the population to apply for statehood. Yeah. So that another really large historical significance of the gold rush. Yeah. So it's discovered in January, right? People are kind of skeptical at first, and then kind of as more and more people begin to report and people are showing up with gold, it really kicks off. And actually, in December of 1848, President James Polk actually essentially confirms that there's gold in California in a presidential address, basically stating that he'd gotten reports from American ministers, right? People who have been sent there to check it out, and confirms that gold is there. And then from that point on, the end of 1848, right, 1849, right, is when the gold rush really just kind of charged in. So they said that by, let's see, I got population numbers here. So the population of California, and we're talking foreigners, right, or Americans, 800 in March of 1848. It was at 100,000, or I'm sorry, 20,000 by the end of 1848, 20,000 by the end of 1848, so in roughly 8 months. And then 100,000 by the end of 1849. That's nuts. So just exponential, right, population explosion with everybody.
What's interesting about that too is travel is so difficult, right? You either have to cross the continent across North America, you take a steamship down to Panama, walk across the Panama Isthmus, pick up a steamship on the other side and up the coast, or you go all the way around North America, South America, and up the other side.
Around Cape Horn, which is not exactly where you want to
Not the place I would ever want to go, absolutely. So, I mean, just the travel alone is amazing when you look at these numbers.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not like they just hopped on a plane at JFK and landed in San Fran, right?
Well, and the population distribution is fascinating too, because the gold rush, by the time the Transcontinental Railroad, you got everybody living extreme west or extreme east, right. And then the railroad fills in the middle. I always found that fascinating. It's it's just the edges of the country. So,
well, it's not. I mean, in a grander scale, obviously, but it's very similar to today. At least you think the most populous cities, right, in the country. Yeah. So we said that statehood was applied for in 1850, right? And so basically, the rest of it is just a matter of, let's talk about how much money, right? How much gold was actually found. And then the kind of the long-lasting effects we said is just, we know now that California is the most populous state in the nation, one of the largest and most politically influential states, obviously, in the country as well.
Electoral votes.
A lot of electoral votes, right. Largest population in the country, right? So what do I got here? We've got, in terms of money, okay, they're saying that the peak year of the gold rush was actually 1852. In 1852, History.com reports that there's $81 million worth of gold taken from California. That was kind of the peak. But by 1857, they said that it kind of leveled out right around 45 million. So you can see there's that real quick spike. But then after that, it kind of goes back down, levels off. And a lot of that could probably, I don't want to say is going to be because of the fact that big industry comes in, but eventually big industry is going to come in and take this over. It's going to go away from being these independent gold miners, right? The 49ers that were coming out. And really by the end of 1850, all that surface gold that you could really get to just by kind of panning, and that whole classic 49er at the creek, panning the dirt and sifting and that kind of thing. By 1850, that's almost gone, right? And what it turns into is industrial hydraulic mining. And that hydraulic mining is really, really productive. And that's why those numbers are super high, right, in the early 1850s. But they're also really detrimental to the landscape of California, right? Like just tearing through the countryside that is still, today beautiful, but also, we talked about open mine shafts, all these kinds of things that have really kind of scarred the landscape that is that central to Northern California. Another kind of outcome of that industrial mining is that all these independent miners who came there to strike it rich don't strike it rich, and then they essentially end up being factory workers, but really wage workers for these giant industrial mining companies. And they're just working in these mines, all the danger and peril that comes along with that, without really the risk reward of having the opportunity to strike it rich, because these industrial mining companies are the ones that are, they're making all of that profit. So some final outcomes of the gold rush, they estimate that in total, during the gold rush time period, around $2 billion worth of gold was mined from California. Obviously, that number, I should have looked it up. I didn't see what that would translate to in today's money.
$2 billion in 1840s, 50s? You're saying? Oh, in there? Oh, my gosh. Holy cow. Mike, there's the hang on. You keep talking. I'm going to go to the inflation calculator.
I was going to say, I got to grab my inflation calculator.
All right. Which one are you using, Mike? So I know which other one to use.
So they're going to check on that, and
I'm
using the population numbers.
I'm using U.S. inflation calculator.
All right, I'll use West Egg.
The big other really result, right, is what we were just kind of talking about, the population of California being what it is. By the end of 1860, California has 380,000 residents, right? So you've gone from when they were added in 1848 at roughly, 700 Americans, right? And then 6,500 Mexican or Spanish descendants, and then the natives. Now they're at 380,000 citizens, right, in 1860. So the population boom assigned with that is going to really just have a huge impact.
Two quick things off of that. So first off, the vast majority of folks who go to California looking for gold to get rich don't find gold. They don't become rich. Actually, the richest people are the merchants, the folks who are selling the equipment to the miners, right? Because you're going to need lanterns, you're going to need tents, you're going to need picks and axes and things like that. The other thing that's always kind of interesting too is that people forget that the land grants, the people's deeds to land, the American government and the California governments actually did not recognize any land grants from what was brought over when the United States took over the land and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So all those folks of Hispanic background basically lost their land, or at least large tracts of their land, to the Americans moving back in. Really kind of tragic, something that we, here on the East Coast, we don't talk a whole lot about. But certainly, if you're living on the West, on the West Coast, and you're of Hispanic background, it certainly creates animosity at the very least. Nick, I don't know about you. I found a number that was a little over 600 million.
Oh
wow.
600
calculator.
600 million, or didn't he say it was 2 billion in that time period?
I'm sorry. You're right. This is why I don't do math.
Yeah.
You're right. That's billion. Yeah.
I was like, wait a second. I'm so confused.
No.
Yeah, no, I got about the same thing. So yeah, that's nuts.
Which is crazy, but here's the even crazier thing: is the Alaskan gold rush actually ends up being more lucrative than the California gold rush. Yeah. Although people leave Alaska once the rush is over, rather than sticking around in California.
What also makes
Can you blame them? Can you
Right,
blame them?
exactly.
Sorry about that. My computer shut off, so I had to switch over to my phone. My bad.
Oh, you're good.
No, you're
All
good.
good.
You're good. Well, the other thing too, I'd like to point out about the Alaskan and like the Yukon gold rush, it makes for better books, like White Fang and Call of the Wild.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Jack London, one of my favorite authors. So yeah, thanks, Mr. Hennard, for covering that for us. So sweet 600 billion in gold. That's nuts. So similar time period, we're gonna have Mr. Crispin now talk about another question that was asked. Student wanted to hear more about the Trail of Tears and the Indian Removal Act, and Mr. Hennard, I think, is kind of the resident expert on that question. So take it away. Did I say Hennard or Crispin?
Hennard.
I believe he said
It's
Henry,
Henry.
but that's
All right.
okay.
Yeah, that's not my my strong point.
Crispin, take it away. Sorry.
So Indian Removal Act is 1830. You have Americans certainly looking at this idea of manifest destiny. They purchased the Louisiana Territory in 1803. They're filling in the eastern part of the country, east of the Appalachian Mountains. Those things stretch out from the Appalachians to the Missouri, Mississippi River. And there's concern about the Native Americans living there, like they're in the way. Is kind of the language that was used. So Congress passes the Indian Removal Act. I actually went and checked the vote on the Indian Removal Act. I always was left under the impression that it was a very popular act. The votes are actually very close in the House and in the Senate. And the president who approves it is Andrew Jackson, who is not exactly a friend of Native Americans, although he thinks he is.
No, he did. No, you're right. He did. He adopted a Native American child. It was I don't know if it was Seminole or not, but I can't remember which nation.
Yeah,
he did.
He had a very paternalistic attitude towards Native Americans. This idea that we need to help take care of them, to help them take care of themselves.
That's the white man's burden.
Very much an early version of white man's burden, completely. But what's interesting is the Indian Removal Act really focuses on what are known as the 5 civilized tribes. These tribes are interesting because they adopted Christian ways. They accepted Christian missionaries. They actually learned how to translate their language into written form, which for Native Americans was highly unusual. Usually it was an oral tradition in many Native American cultures. The 5 civilized tribes are the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cherokee, I mentioned Creek, and Seminole. And they felt that they were actually relatively insulated against negative attitudes from the American government because they were American-like, relatively assimilated. But again, Congress passes this Indian Removal Act, which essentially tells all Native Americans living east of the Mississippi River, you have to head west of the Mississippi River. All the land east of the Mississippi River belongs to the white men, U.S. government, and they were given a time frame to exit. Overlapping all this, you have an important Supreme Court case, Worcester v. Georgia, which is another. I'm not a huge fan of Supreme Court cases, but this one's kind of an interesting one. This is 1832. The state of Georgia, not the national government, the state of Georgia had passed a law saying that Native Americans were only allowed to stay on their land if they were given permission by the state of Georgia. And the reason why they put this law in place was there was gold found in the western hills of Georgia, right where the Cherokee were living. Surprise, surprise. Of course, the Cherokee had lived there long before any white settlers had arrived, and this is an effort to remove them off that land and take the gold. There's a Christian missionary, Worcester, who felt this was wrong, felt it violated the Constitution. So on behalf of the Cherokee, they used the legal system to try and fight back rather than actually like grabbing a gun and saying, "Follow me." They actually played within the system, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled, little federalism here, that the national government is the only government that can negotiate treaties and laws about Native Americans. Therefore, Worcester and the Cherokees didn't have to move. Loved Andrew Jackson's response to that, and that basically was, if I get the quote right, he told the Chief Justice, "You made the decision, you enforce it."
Yep.
Andrew Jackson essentially ignored the order of the court and used the military to force the 5 civilized tribes west, which is where you come up with the Trail of Tears. That's usually associated with the Cherokee. Depending on where you look, the number of Cherokee moved west from Georgia to Oklahoma it's pretty solidly set at 16,000. The number who died on the Trail of Tears ranges anywhere from 2,000 to 8,000, depending on what source you're looking at. And of course, it becomes historically known as the Trail of Tears because essentially in Cherokee were told you can only take with you what you can carry. And it was such a devastating event that you could, according to the Cherokee legend, you could follow the trail because the ground was soaked in the tears of those who were forced to go on the march. The 5 civilized tribes are all relocated west. It's a grand total of 60,000 Native Americans. The Seminole actually will fight the hardest. There's a couple of Seminole wars in Florida. They live in the swamps in Florida, very difficult to kind of root out of there. But eventually they're moved west as well. Interesting fact, I never knew till I was just did a little digging really quick to kind of get ready for today. The United States government actually in the early 1900s paid reparations to the 5 civilized tribes.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah, in 1905, the U.S. Congress agreed to give the Cherokee $1 million for what had happened to them. Although if you take the value of the land, the value of the gold that was lost, the people lost, I'm sure that was valued way more than $1 million. But,
Mr. Chrisman,
yeah, go ahead.
If you don't mind me jumping, I was
Sure.
I was in Colorado this summer with my father, and actually it kind of relates to both topics so far.
Oh, yeah.
There was a bunch of old mines out there and guys that were still going and looking for gold like every day, which I thought was kind of cool. But I went to Mesa Verde and a bunch of like Native American sites out there, and they said the biggest issue that all of them took with the government was the land, and they put them on like these, what's the word? It's like a plateau, but it has a specific
a mesa.
A mesa. It's in the name. Yeah. What am I saying?
But, that's all right.
Yeah, and like how they're isolated from communities and so difficult to go and find jobs now, and there's no running water, and so that was like definitely, and you could see it firsthand out there. Like the land that they were given was pretty gnarly stuff.
Yeah, and one of the sorry, you go ahead, Mr.
No, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
One of the biggest issues for Native Americans to this day from that case of like Worcester versus Georgia and other Supreme Court cases is like tribal control of lands. Like this still, as we sit here now, is a huge issue. I just finished reading Killers of the Flower Moon, which is about the Osage murders on the Oklahoma reservation, the Osage. And these Native Americans basically got what were called head rights, which were oil grants to the – usually on reservations, the Native Americans did not get the mineral rights. And in this case, they did. And they call it the underground reservation. And these Native Americans were some of the wealthiest people in the world. And systematically, they were murdered by the whites in the area. Like everybody thought it was just this one guy, I believe his last name was Hale, that was kind of orchestrating the murders. But the author of the book, David Grant, uncovers like, no, this was huge. Like that it was a massive conspiracy. And they had guardians. Like they couldn't manage their own money from their head rights. So you had to have like a guardian who would manage your account, and you had to like apply if you wanted to get off that. So like there's just another example, like Mr. Ritz pointing out, like tribal control of lands tracing back from this time is still a massive issue for Native Americans.
Right.
Well, if you look at where these reservations are located, I mean, all of them are located on land that was seen as not valuable to Americans, the American government. And then when it is deemed to be valuable, then there's a reason to kick them out. Maybe if you consider the climate of Georgia and moving to Oklahoma, I can't imagine the climate shock, first off. And then later on, that Oklahoma territory is called the Indian Territory, and until they find oil on it. And then all of a sudden with the Industrial Revolution going on, well, now maybe we need to relocate you someplace else. If any of our students have been over to the reservation over by Oakville, I mean, look around that reservation. It's a massive swamp. It's just not an area that anybody else wants. If you look at where the big reservations are, where are they? In places like Montana, Arizona, Utah, again, areas that are not deemed valuable right now, or even when they were created.
Yeah.
And, that's unfortunately a long, sad history our government and their dealings with Native Americans.
Yeah.
Well, the thing, I just think back to, this is not obviously my expertise, but I remember, when teaching 7th grade U.S. history and talking about the different tribes of natives that live there, it's always regionalized, and their ways of life and their traditions are based around the area in which they live, the types of homes that they make, the types of clothes that they wear. All of that is directly related to the climate and the what do you call it, flora and fauna that live within the region that they're native to. Yeah. And so by picking up and changing all of those things, you essentially are asking a group of people to do something completely different, because you can't get the same animals, you can't get the same supplies and resources in Arizona or Colorado that you could get in the swamps and the hills of Georgia. So you're completely changing a way of life for a group of people that had been tradition, right, for hundreds of years.
Right. And something else, Mr. Crispin, I know you know this too. I wasn't sure if you're going to bring it up or not. I'm not as sure the exact numbers. You might know better than me. Didn't a lot of the nations that were moved westward in the expansion also have slaves?
A decent number did, yeah. Well, again, they're in the South, which is that is a part of the Southern culture. Right. Although the way that Native Americans actually use slavery against each other as tribes. And that was set up. That was different than chattel slavery. But these 5 civilized tribes, I mean, they tried to become Americanized in the way that they wanted to be accepted as real Americans, and real American Southerners did own slaves. So
it was almost like they were trying to prove that they were like civilized. Like, look, like we're
just like you. Yeah.
Right. It was part of I think I read an article about that in the Smithsonian Mag, but I can't remember. I'm gonna have to go look that up. So maybe something a little more less depressing. Mr. Ritz we just recently had the Olympics postponed, the Summer Olympics.
Oh, I'm so disappointed.
I'm devastated.
I was gonna go.
I'm devastated. But you were gonna go?
Yeah, I'm deflated.
Really?
Yeah, I was planning a big Asia trip, but I think it's all off the table now.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
It's all good. Go out west with you, maybe.
Yeah, hey man, if I had to move the trip back a little bit, but if let me know if
I might be driving
parks. So the one thing that I'm really bummed about with the Olympics is that Ryan Krauser, the American shot putter, he broke in 2016, guy breaks the Olympic record, wins the gold medal, first gold medal for U.S. shot putter in like forever, and he's been like scratching at that world record. And I thought he was going to break it this summer, and I'm like, oh my gosh! So he's got to wait another year, but it's probably the right decision. It doesn't make it any better, I guess. But Mr. Rich is going to tell us about some history of the Olympics and some more history about it.
Yeah, I apologize for the lighting. I'm kind of working some things out clearly here, but So Olympics kind of start off in 776 BC. It stems from ancient Greece, especially with like the polytheism going on in the city of Olympia. It began as sort of a religious festival to try and honor the gods, specifically Zeus. And if you follow, mythology, his home is supposedly Olympia in Greece, which is sort of in the western portion of the Greek mainland there. One kind of interesting thing I was looking at this morning that kind of made me think of you, Mr. D, was the original Olympic Stadium was way off in the middle of nowhere. And in the off season, I guess, they had like just wheat fields growing in the stadium. But during the festival in the Olympics, they would bring 40, 50, sometimes up to 60, 70,000 people there. And to me, it kind of reminded me of like the Bills Stadium out in the middle of nowhere.
Oh my God.
Maybe a similar atmosphere.
People jumping through tables and stuff.
I don't know if it was quite like that, but it kind of goes through a major transformation though during the Hellenistic period, and the Romans kind of started viewing it as like almost a tourist attraction. They build a bunch of gyms near the stadium, and now people start training year round. They're working on racing, boxing, wrestling, long jump. one thing that kind of caught my attention, they started this sport. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. It's called pancration, I believe.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, but it's basically the UFC fight. So the only rules were you couldn't bite and you couldn't gouge anyone's eyes or ears.
Totally legitimate. Totally legitimate.
But it was boxing, wrestling. You could kick, and a couple other interesting things that go along with that. I saw that the Spartans in training would allow their warriors to bite, to gouge, to pull hair, all of that, in an effort to have them be, ready for whatever they faced in there. Also, the Spartans were probably the group of people who introduced nudity to some of these events. And to me, that kind of related, modern day, we think of like the body issue of ESPN and still idolizing like Olympic, athletes' bodies, that type of thing. So then the Olympics kind of fall off for 1,500 years. And all of a sudden in 1896, we have a Frenchman named Baron Pierre de Coubertin. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I did take French for a few years, so working on it. And he's going to bring the Olympics back in 1896. Originally, he wanted to bring them back in 1900. But all the athletes were so excited hearing about the idea that the games were going to come back. They said, let's just do it right now in 1896. They go back to Athens and they have the first modern Olympic Games. Another kind of interesting thing I saw this morning was that the Olympics recognized 206 different countries, even though I believe the number right now is like 195, 196 I was seeing. So you don't actually have to be a country to submit athletes to the Olympic Games. You just have to have a board and that type of thing. Let's see what else I jot down here. I guess kind of the main thing of the Olympics, and actually Mr. Chrisman just bought me a book. Thank you. I just started it about how soccer is a global sport and the idea of globalization and bringing everyone together. And I figured the Olympics are kind of yes, it's a sporting event, but historically and socially, they have so much influence on the world. And there's been so many times in history, like Paris 1900, we have the first women competing in tennis on an international scale. Berlin 1936, obviously with Nazi Germany coming out with ideas about, the Aryan race and racial superiority. And then Jesse Owens goes and wins everything he does.
I love that. That's like karma right in your face.
Exactly. Right. 1948, the first wheelchair Olympics are hosted. And now we have the para athletes still. And then recently in 2000 in Sydney, we have the first time in an opening ceremony since the Korean War and the split that North and South Korea march under one flag, that blue all of Korea flag. So obviously, yes, it's sport, but it has so many unique opportunities to make a statement or a message on an international scale. I guess I'm kind of curious, as you guys have been through more Olympics than I have.
Oh, that was well played,
not
sir.
by
Well
much.
played.
Not by
stories
much.
or anything. Not by much. True.
Yeah.
I'll just mention my two favorite. I was looking forward to the U23 men's soccer team this coming Tokyo Olympics, but without them, I will say Michael Phelps and Usain Bolt for me are my two favorite Olympians. Just so dominant at what they did. And I'll give a wave to the Dream Team as well. But I would like to hear from you guys what your favorite, if you have any, Olympians.
Go ahead, Henry. Do you got anything?
Well, I got to go with Michael Johnson. I'm older than you guys, as Mr. Ritz brought up. So if I remember correctly, he's like late 90s, like 96.
Atlanta.
The most vivid Olympic Games I think I have. I remember Barcelona 92, but 96, you know what I mean? I was 15. It was in the U.S. It was Olympic fever, right? So Atlanta, Georgia, 1996. Michael Johnson, right? World's fastest man at the time, obviously before Usain Bolt.
Right.
Carrie Strug and the women's gymnastics team, right? I remember that vault. I remember watching her do that vault and landing, right, where she wrecked her ankle and she's still like stuck the landing on one foot. So that's something that sticks with me a lot. And oddly enough, I actually watched the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens from a hotel room in Virginia while I was waiting to be deployed to Iraq. So those kind of stand out to me and of course, the opening ceremonies of the 2008 games in Beijing, right?
Yeah, those were awesome.
Those are probably some of my biggest like Olympic memories for me.
I have to say 2016 Ryan Krauser winning the shot put was just insane, and the U.S. took one too. Like Jordan Kovacs finished second, and I was actually watching it at the Geneseo track and field team had like an alumni event at a Red Wings game, so it was funny because we're all there hanging out, but the whole coaching staff of the Geneseo team is up in the bleachers watching on our phones, and it was it was Usain Bolt's last Olympics then too.
Yep.
So we were all wanting to watch Bolt's like last couple races. So we're all watching that, and there's a baseball game going on. And then the other one for me that I'll never forget was the 2010 Winter Olympics when the U.S. hockey team. Oh yeah. Oh my gosh! I was in my dorm room. I just got to college, and Ryan Miller, Buffalo Sabres, is the goalie for the U.S. team, and is just standing on his head the whole Olympics. Like when they beat Canada that first time. The U.S. had no business being in that game. I mean, he faced something like 46 shots, which is unheard of for an Olympic team to give up that many shots, and they still won. And I know it didn't – and I still, every time I see Sidney Crosby score that goal in the U.S. I mean, I remember looking at Ryan Miller's face, like, after that game, and I've never seen a face like that after – like an athlete. Like, that – for me, that was – my heart broke for him. Like being a Sabres fan and everything. And and he had amazing Olympics. Like if you're going to give anybody the MVP of the whole thing, it was to him. It's incredible. So those are my two favorite Olympic moments.
All right. So since I've seen more Olympics than all of you,
yes, you have.
I'm going to go with a couple old school moments.
Okay.
That I know some of them I know you won't remember because you weren't around. I remember watching the Miracle on Ice.
If I was alive for that, I just want to say I don't know.
But here's the thing: it wasn't live.
I know.
It was an hour tape delay, so it was. But still, I mean, that moment was amazing. There was a moment too before Carrie Strug when Mary Lou Retton did a perfect 10 off of a vault to win. I believe that was the '84 Los Angeles Olympics. Those were amazing moments. At least in my memory. Of the Olympics. There have been so many great moments in athletes. Greg Louganis, one of the great divers, just dominant. He went into every Olympic and it was like, okay, who's going to get silver? Because you knew he was going to win gold. But there's been other moments too where I don't remember the guy's name. There was a British runner.
Derek Redmond.
What's that?
Derek Redmond, the 400.
Was that the one where his dad came out of the stands?
Yeah.
He pulled his hamstring. He couldn't. It didn't look like he was going to be able to finish. His dad came out, and his dad kind of helped him along. I mean, he was disqualified, but what a great.
Oh, right. I've seen that video.
It's incredible.
Dad and son finishing it together. And there's just so many moments like that. And exactly like you said, it becomes nationalistic, but at the same time, it's individualistic as well. It's about the breaking down those borders and seeing that we're all the same. We all have goals, and we're all trying to do the best we can.
Yeah,
I've always enjoyed the Olympics just for that.
Yeah, I was comparing to some of my students on a video I shot earlier this week, nationalism in sporting events with like kind of what we're going through right now, and maybe even like a military conflict, but how it kind of rallies everyone together, brings everyone under one flag, and you have a common goal. So.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about the modern Olympics, and that's the time period where nationalism is dominant, and people they divide up Africa. They're looking to divide up other places. That's where you have kind of the seeds being sown for World War I with nationalism. So not surprising that, countries would want to have a chance to kind of show off we're better than you are.
Right. Yeah. Even fighting this disease, who's going to be the best at it.
Right.
So the last question we have, and this one's going to be just like, by the way, Mr. Ritz, great question there to close it out.
Oh, appreciate it.
Nice job. I'm going to be taking over my job as kind of the producer and host of this show if you want it.
Not yet.
One day.
Yeah.
You know, so I got and the students are gonna kick out of this too. The funny thing is, one day when Mr. Chrisman and Mr. Light leave us, you know, they'll be wailing and gnashing of teeth when they retire.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna be the oldest member of the department.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
That's terrifying.
Don't go gently, Mr. Chrisman.
Well, you're completely SOL now because, you know, Miss Hammer was supposed to take the reins, over the torch, right? Yeah. So that leaves only you. That means you have to be in charge.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
So Katie Dobry asked kind of one of our other questions was best, worst, most interesting presidents. We kind of did an episode where we talked a lot about presidents, and I want to do something different with your question, Katie, even though I liked it. I picked 5 presidents I just thought were interesting. And I'm going to kind of have on my side panel on my own screen this C-SPAN rankings. Students, go check this out. I think the rankings, let me take a look here. I think they started in like 2000 they started it, and they kind of do it every so often. They'll actually survey historians, political scientists, all groups of people, and they rank the presidents, and they kind of have scores for them. So I'm going to keep that in the side panel on my screen, and I actually chose a few presidents to talk about, and everybody jump in on these. So the first one I wanted to talk about was William McKinley, kind of an obscure president. Not many people know a ton about him. He's ranked 16th on this list of historians, so near the top. He's president from 1896 to 1901. He is assassinated and opens the door for, you know, my favorite president, Theodore Roosevelt, who was his VP. But he's assassinated, so that makes him unique and interesting. And but before that, there you go. That's my boy. Yep. So he is elected in 1896, Republican, largely by business interests and donations from the wealthiest Americans. He's going against William Jennings Bryan, who is a progressive populist.
Check out that electoral map sometime, because it's the middle of the country and the southern part of the country that go for William Jennings Bryan, the agricultural areas. The west and the east coast, like we had talked about before, where industry is flourishing, totally go for McKinley. Yeah,
the industrial interests really got him in there. He's interesting because of his foreign policy, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And he's a guy that's openly an anti-imperialist. He doesn't want any wars of conquest. He doesn't want any wars. He was a Civil War veteran, and he himself said, you know, I saw the dead piled up at Antietam, and I never want to see another war again. Yet he can't hold back the tide of public opinion to get them involved in the Spanish-American War. So be president during that, and he says he doesn't want to take territory on this stuff, but yet after the war, the Philippines, who we promised their independence, they helped us. He's like, no, gonna have to keep these a territory. So he's kind of like this. Like, there's two groups of thought on him. Like, some historians think like he was really like he believed all this stuff. He just got caught up in the gears of history type of thing. And then there's other historians like, no, he's totally devious, like devious. He's just trying to paint himself as like the picture of, oh, I didn't want, but he's conniving behind the scenes. So what are you guys' thoughts on McKinley?
Well, I guess I'll start. I've always loved the discussion about Teddy Roosevelt with McKinley, because Roosevelt's an up-and-coming political guy, and the Republican Party's scared to death of him. So their basic premise is, where can we put him that'll hurt us least? Let's put him at vice president. Only a heartbeat away from the presidency, which he ends up getting. I
would have loved to see J.P. Morgan's face when he gets the news that McKinley's been assassinated.
Right. Well, and Teddy Roosevelt's up in the Adirondacks hiking, and somebody actually comes and finds him to say, hey, by the way, you're now the president of the United States. We need you to come back.
Yeah.
McKinley's such an interesting guy. I don't know if he gets caught up in what's going on, if yellow journalism sways public opinion.
Can't stem the tide of it, yeah.
Yeah, and you take someplace like Hawaii, where he didn't want to annex Hawaii. Matter of fact, he thought what the American businesses that were doing there, overthrowing the queen and everything, and setting up their own puppet government, was horrible. Mm-hmm. And they actually delayed annexing Hawaii until after McKinley was out of office, which of course they were hoping for the next election, but he's assassinated instead. So he's such a perfect example of complexity when it comes to presidents.
Right.
Things are never easy when you're sitting in that office.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts on McKinley before I throw another one out there?
I was looking up on the left here his last words when he got assassinated, and I just thought it was
Oh
Wrote
yeah.
your note. He says, "Be careful how you tell my wife." I'm not sure if that's accurate, but
You know that is. Yeah,
yeah,
I heard that. Yeah.
it's a
His wife
cool
suffered
last
from
gesture.
epileptic seizures and
Right.
was prone to kind of fits. So that was his main concern.
Yeah, they
Huh.
thought he was actually going to pull through for a while. Like
Well,
they tried to get a hold of Roosevelt, and they're like, "Do you want to
Yeah.
take that away? Go ahead, Mr. Ritz. Were you reading about
no,
that?"
no, no. Go ahead. I was agreeing with you. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because
Carry on.
I think that they were like, "Oh, he's going to be okay. Maybe you don't need to come back." And then they're like, "No, you got to come to Buffalo." Like,
Yeah.
so,
Pretty tough guy taking 2 bullets and hanging in there for a little bit.
yeah. You know, I mean, it goes. How long did he hang on for? Do you have that up right now?
I'm looking. Yeah. McKinley dies from gangrene. Gone. Yeah,
Of course.
undetected internal wound. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah. It probably, if it's gangrene, it would have taken, I would imagine, like a couple days to develop.
Yeah.
A couple days at least, right?
Yeah.
Well, hey, listen, I have to jet
go?
out. I've got to go wrangle some cats and get ready for our parade here.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing as many students as we can out at the parade today, and I'll see you guys, through the looking glass, as they say.
Social
That's right.
distancing. Yeah.
Have a good one.
All right. I'll
All
see
right,
you.
guys, take care.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for the invite. I hope we get a chance to do it again.
Oh yeah.
Be
we will.
nice to do it in person
In
sometime
person.
soon, but if not, I appreciate the inclusion.
Yeah. No problem.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
See ya.
See ya.
All right. Next president we got is JFK, John F. Kennedy, president in the early '60s. Reason I got him on here is because he's a guy that when I first became interested in history and was studying presidents, looking at them, I don't think I was that big of a fan of his. And then as I get older, I've become a bigger fan of his, largely because of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
I'm reading. Yeah, I mean, I finished Killers of the Flower Moon, and now I'm between 13 Days and World War I book. And you know, Mrs. Benzon lovingly put on Facebook when I put that, she's like, "Take a break from World War I for a while." And I'm like, I have been. I just read Killers of the Flower Moon, you know. But his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis, in my opinion, is fascinating. Here's a guy who, with the Bay of Pigs, kind of gives up his judgment because he's young and inexperienced, and he kind of lets the military leaders lead that, and it's a disaster. And then because of that, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, the military leaders are pushing him to do more, right? Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviets bringing missiles to Cuba. They're a threat to the United States. And the whole deal is, you know, do we take these missiles out? Then we risk a war, et cetera, et cetera. And the world's on edge for 13 days, about 2 weeks. And I don't know, like his handling of it, just his confidence in himself and his own civilian people to stand up to the military and say, you know, let the military folks know the president still is the commander of the armed forces. I'm still the one in charge of them, you know, and he ends up making the right call. And my favorite quote of the whole thing is he says something to the effect of, you know, if these brass hats, if the military are wrong, nobody's going to be able to be around to tell them that they were wrong because we're all going to be dead.
Yep.
So, I mean, that he fascinates me. I don't know, what are your thoughts on JFK?
I think that when I was student teaching with you and we watched the 13 Days.
Yeah, we did that
video,
lesson. We did that lesson
Yep.
where we do the role playing. Yeah.
Was also what hooked it for me. And just watching, especially, I think the movie does a good job of showing him and his staff and how they deal with the whole crisis and how they kind of, you know, like what you're just saying, if the military gets their way, we're all not going to be here, but also we got to be firm and act correctly and quickly. Yeah, a fascinating dialogue between the two powers, though.
Yeah, Mr. Crispin.
His vision is interesting. Yeah, he's a great visionary. If you think about it, you know, look at his first his only inaugural address where he's talking about
Right.
we have to learn to live on this planet together and in peace.
Mhm.
You know, he challenges to put a man on the moon within a decade, which is, you know, unheard of at that point because
Yep.
they didn't even put an animal into space at that point, at least not successfully. But as much as he's a visionary, as much as he does great things leadership wise, he also has huge character flaws, and I think that's what makes him such an interesting person. You know, he's not faithful to his wife. She knows it. He knows it. The country knows it. But they're willing to look past that. And it's one of the few times I think we can really see where, as he put, the torch had been passed to a new generation. There's a new line of thinking in the White House. There's a new way of doing things that wasn't necessarily bad, just different, and another generation saying, okay, it's time for us to step up and take over, which is kind of interesting because I'm waiting to see that happen here in our country. If you look at the people who've been running the last 4 or 5 elections, it's been the same demographic, at least age wise. When are we going to start to see a younger, I mean, there are so many good politicians out there, maybe an oxymoron, I don't know. But there are enough young people out there who are engaged and involved that their time is ripe, I think, for a John F. Kennedy kind of figure.
I agree. No, he has one of my favorite quotes of a president, and that is, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That idea in of itself, after the New Deal, 20 some odd years before, for a president really to step up and say, what do you think you can do for us? And I think in today's times, what's going on with the virus right now, also a quote like, what can you do for your country? Stay home on your couch.
Right.
Don't go to spring break.
Yeah. Off the back of that, I was just seeing right here, his inaugural address, his ending quote was, pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and success of liberty. So again, yeah, I kind of see what you're saying about this current time. Yeah.
What's interesting about JFK is I've also heard this argument made, and I think this is another thing that's interesting about him. Some historians and some political scientists would argue that today they would not be able to tell you what party JFK would be in, if you'd be a Democrat or Republican, because like the quote you just said, Zach, kind of sounds Republican. Ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. Kind of sound, I don't like take people out of their party and put them into another one necessarily, because it's kind of like playing with history a little bit, too. But he's definitely he's definitely a moderate. And then you'll not forget the beginning of his civil rights process, which is a good segue into his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who we're going to talk about as our next person. LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, JFK's vice president, will become president after JFK is assassinated. I got him here because I find him interesting, and I want to pull up the list of presidents. So, by the way, John F. Kennedy is ranked 8th on that list. I think I think it's about where JFK should be. McKinley, we said, was what, 15? That's 16, ish. Okay, not bad. LBJ is 10, right? He is in the top 10, and I understand that he's in the top 10 because of the monumental civil rights laws that were passed during his time. No doubt, huge right there. For me, though, LBJ is a little high because of his role with the Vietnam War. And you can make the case that LBJ is in the whole country by his presidency is kind of pulled into Vietnam, and it's sort of like it's a done deal. Like, what else did he really have a choice? But when you look at the Gulf of Tonkin resolution and the Gulf of Tonkin incident, it's the it's the total. First of all, to this day, we're not sure if the USS Maddox was hit by anything, right? It was really stormy weather. We have no clue. And I'm watching The West Wing, and this is actually one of the things they talk about in The West Wing. And if you look at JFK with Cuba, he's calm. It's 2 examples of foreign policy decision making to me. Like, JFK holds it together on the Cuba issue, and LBJ just gets sucked in to the Vietnam issue. And and so his ranking, they break it down by category. And so obviously there's 44 presidents at the time in 2017. They did this survey. Well, there's 45, but they don't count Trump. So you're rated on a scale of 1 to 44. And so they gave him there's public persuasion, crisis leadership, economic management. They gave him an international relations score. His average is 41 out of 44. So, I mean, they agree that, historians agree that his score is kind of pulled down by Vietnam, but I just don't know if 10's a little high for me.
I think the only reason he can get the 10 is because of what he started and tried to do for the people of the country as a whole. So, like,
the Great Society programs,
exactly, yeah. So I can see him being high up on the list, but you're right, with the whole Vietnam scandal and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution.
I mean, I would look at the Vietnam War personally as the second most divisive issue in American history, next to slavery. So next to slavery, the Civil War. I would say, bar none, it's right there with him.
I do feel though that his goals for the trying to help the people of the country are enough to get him up on the leaderboard.
I agree.
See, but what I think's interesting here, though, is so presidents are the ones who get the credit or the blame, right?
Right.
And it's one person. It's one person. So you talk about you talk about things like the war on poverty. How much have we declared victory on the war on poverty, right? He helps establish the food stamp program. He helps to improve Medicare and Medicaid. The civil rights, legislation and all that. But what always kind of gets passed over is he's a Democratic president working with a Republican Senate and a Republican Congress.
Yeah.
And although he gets credit for passing these things, the Congress is the one that really does the bulk of the work, right?
Well, yeah,
he's the visionary, right? That sees it through to the end. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. He gets a chance to finish off what JFK started, and maybe he finishes the vision that JFK had laid out.
Mm-hmm. I want to also point out, I'm looking at this list, and this is why he's so high. One of the categories they rank you on is relations with Congress. And again, you're getting a score of 1 through 44 here. Does anyone want to guess what his score is?
Probably top 5, I would think.
Number 1. He has the number 1 best relations with Congress. And he was speaker. Was he Speaker of the House? Was he in the House?
He was in the House. I know he's at least in the House for a while. He was one of the youngest members of the House of Representatives from a very poor district
in Texas.
He was a school teacher, so he understood poverty. He understood discrimination. And I think his background as an educator really helped with things like universal pre-K and things like that. I mean, he understood that if you don't have education, you're behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
So special ed services like libraries. I mean, so I can see him being up there.
Maybe I'm being a little hard on him. I don't know. You know what it is? It's just the extremes. Like you got.
But he's not a nice guy though.
No,
he was
such
not
an
a nice
intimidator.
guy.
Yes. He was like, wouldn't he? This is totally too much information, but he loved to go into the office of other people like senators and stuff.
I didn't know this.
And many of these offices, students need to get a kick out of this. Many of these offices have their own bathrooms.
Right.
And you would go in and take a
number.
Leave the door open and take a number 2 in there, and it's just like a total power move.
That's a power move.
Whoa!
He did that in the Oval Office too.
I know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And he was tall.
My dog.
Exactly. It's like when you're walking your dog and they know there's another dog with a yard, and so they go poop in that yard. And he would use his height to like intimidate people when he spoke to him, because he was like, I think he was like 6'4" or something like that.
Yeah, he was a really tall guy.
All right, so you guys kind of softened me a bit. I don't know. It's just I'm so critical of his Vietnam foreign policy that I kind of forget. But you know what? Hey, you got to take the whole president. So I think he probably does deserve between 10 and 13. I would agree with that. Next one, Harry S. Truman, for interesting presidents. So I actually want to avoid the atomic bomb question a little bit, because it's a thing that people always associate him with. And I want to focus on what I think is one of the best moves ever made by a president that took the most guts. And that was the desegregation of the military.
Yep.
He's coming up on a re-election. And
that's right. And
when most people would be like, well, I got to think about my re-election, maybe I'll do it after. This man does it before. I mean, and people make public comment. He made comments about the fact, like, look, I think it's the right decision. I'm going to do it. And he does it by executive order. He doesn't even, and technically he's constitutionally allowed to do that because he's commander of the armed forces. So it's within the power of the executive to do so. It's constitutional. And he's like, I think it's the right call. I don't care if I lose the election.
But you also have a large number of veterans who had been through World War II, who they didn't care what color the guy was next to him.
True. You're right. Yeah.
And I'm in agreement with you. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to downplay that. That's an important thing to do. But I also think he has a good read on the people at that point saying, if my loved one came back because the guy next to him was an African American and saved him, I don't care.
Yeah.
My loved one came home, or I served near people, or they. Some of the bomber units found out later that the Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen were African-American pilots. They thought they were the greatest, they wanted the red tails as their escorts, you know?
Yeah.
And they don't even find out till after the war is over that, oh my goodness, those are African-American pilots. So I think he understood a little bit of where the country was at. I also think he understood too that the country was not ready for Congress, and Congress was not ready to do that nationally.
Yeah.
But he had the power to do it, like you said, within the military, and that's the first important step. And remember too, Jackie Robinson, in his playing with the Dodgers was not too far. I can't remember if it was just before or just after desegregation in the military, somewhere in that time frame though. So I mean, you know, the world is changing. At least the United States is changing in that time period when it comes to that.
Yeah, he's on the list of presidents. He is 6th, and I think he deserves that. I think he deserves that ranking.
Well, and remember too, he fires MacArthur, right? And that's another bold. That's like a 1A to me. I mean, here's MacArthur, who's, you know, one of the greatest World War II heroes ever, and he's talking about nuking the Chinese during the Korean War. And Truman's like, no, we won't. Yeah. And Truman really reestablishes that the civilian government controls the military, not the other way around.
Right.
Mr. Ritz, any thoughts on Truman?
No, I mean, I brought up the similar things. We just talked about him in the 10th grade class when we were, and I just always remark on how he responds to such huge foreign policy tasks as in such a strong way, in a well-handled way for someone who really doesn't have that much experience going into it with any foreign policy at all. And he's got to navigate, you know, the United Nations, the ending of the war. So, you know, I think he does a good job with that.
You know what? That's a good point, because when Truman becomes president, first of all, I mean, he gets introduced to the atomic bomb and had no idea. Secondly, he is probably president during some of the most confusing times for America, because it's after the war. I mean, you could argue the man kept the lid on World War III with the Berlin airlift.
Yeah.
You know, there's another tension moment, kind of JFK 13 days type of thing, where, I mean, totally just bold move, international chess match. I mean, he would have been, when Stalin blockades that side of Berlin, he would have been totally within reason to take some kind of military action. But he's like, no, you know, your move, Stalin. I'm going to start dropping in supplies via airplane. Yeah. You know, and Stalin's like, well, crap, I didn't see that. Okay.
And for over a year. You know,
I know.
JFK's is 13 days. You know, Truman's emergency is over a year.
Yeah. And so Harry Truman, another president I just have tons of respect for. And the last one I want to talk about is Gerald Ford. So all the presidents I picked were kind of high in the rankings, like JFK's 8, Truman 6, LBJ 10, McKinley 16. Where is Ford? Ford is 25. And, you know, interesting, because he's not president for very long. He will take over after Nixon resigns from office over Watergate. And probably for his time, one of the most reviled presidents while in office by the American people, because people were so mad at Richard Nixon for trying to obstruct the justice during the Watergate scandal and all of his problems. But when he pardons Nixon, really, I mean, historians are very, very forgiving of him for doing, and like thought it was the right decision to move the country forward and everything and get past this, especially during the, you know, kind of some tenuous moments of the Cold War and Vietnam. And
yeah, but I'll tell you what, at the time though, I remember it. At the time, I mean, I was in kindergarten. I remember that election with Ford and Carter. That was the first election I ever remember. And it was so divisive. Yeah. So divisive, because although it might have been the right decision, you know, the comments that kept getting made were, you know, what if you had broken the law? You know, would the president pardon you? And we're not talking about some small deal here. We're talking about using other elements of the government to, you know, spy on a presidential candidate, and then lying about it, and then, you know, obstructing justice through basically destroying evidence. And you know, when we talk about impeaching presidents, you know, he's the only person to ever step down. Yeah. Because he was probably going to be impeached, found guilty, and removed from office. So
pretty quickly.
You know, at the time, it was not popular. Looking back, I think having some perspective on it now, it was the right thing to do. But as somebody who lived through it, I remember it was crazy.
Yeah.
People were up in arms. I remember discussions in our classroom about, people loved Carter, not because he was Carter, but they hated Ford. I don't know. And we talk about never Trumpers right now. There were people back then who basically were saying anybody but Ford.
Yeah, and he also had some goofy things about it. He had a lot of gaffes. I mean,
he tripped and fell more times than I can count.
Well, that's the first thing. He tripped and fell a bunch. The other one, I watched a debate clip with him. I think it was him and Carter. You might know the debate clip I'm talking about where he's like, there is no Soviet presence in Eastern Europe. I'm paraphrasing. And the moderator can't believe what's happening. And it's like you're just watching Ford lose the election on live television as it unfolds. I mean, I got a soft spot for Ford because of where he went to college.
Yeah, I was just looking at that.
University of
Played
Michigan.
too.
Yeah, and he was a center.
Yeah.
There's also an interesting story about him and I believe it was an African American teammate, and I don't know the exact story, but like some of the other players in the team were giving this teammate grief, and he stood up for him. I can't remember the exact one, but I have to check that out. But he's a unique guy.
It says here he was also an assistant football coach at Yale University.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, and so he's a football player, Michigan Wolverine football player. I mean, what more could you want? Yeah, what more could you want? So, any other thoughts on Gerald Ford before we close this out?
No, I'm good.
All right.
I'm good.
Yeah.
So, we're happy you guys joined us today. We'll probably do more of these. Hopefully, we can get in person sometime. You got to send us more questions. You can email them to Mr. Crispin, Mr. Ritz, or myself. We're going to put this up, share it on social media. This will be on the YouTube page. We don't use the YouTube page for podcasts so much anymore just because it's difficult to post them. I got to convert it into a video file and everything. So to listen to us, if you have an iPhone, you can go on your iPhone to click on podcasts, right? Click on podcasts and just search Holley History and you'll find us. Or you can go listen on SoundCloud. You don't need an account. There's a SoundCloud app where you can follow us. And every time we come out with a podcast, you can listen. I'm working on the shorts right now. I know Mr. Crispin's going to be working on them soon too. So we'll have the whole U.S. curriculum from beginning to end for you to listen to.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So yesterday I tried to keep my episode on World War I and women's suffrage short, under 20 minutes.
Right.
And I think, all right, that's enough. I think I finished World War I at 19 minutes.
That's pretty good.
Which is pretty good for me.
That's pretty good.
But the episodes, but they're supposed to be under 20 minutes. So I'm like, I'm watching my Audacity thing on my software going, okay, I'm on, okay. I'm like, all right. So, it is what it is. But thanks for joining me today, guys.
Yeah, this was awesome. This was fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody at the parade here in a little while.
Same.
Yep. I'm literally going to go try to download this, get it on YouTube, and jump in my car and go to the parade. You going, Mr. Ritz?
Yeah, I'm gonna come out of my home here for a little bit.
Okay.
Venture out.
All right. So, hey, thanks for listening to Holley History, watching us in this case. Send us some more questions. Tweet it at us at History Holley. Email us your questions. We'll discuss just about anything. And thanks for joining us. See you later. All right, we're off recording now. I thought we were.
Awesome.
Maybe not.